Hello everybody, Roger here again, and I'm out here at Rauhala, and today I'm going to explore the ditch digging project in the Hungry 30s that drained Illeman's bog or Halminen swamp into the creek here at Rauhala. And part of the story has to do with this tree in behind me here, the smokehouse tree at Rauhala. So watch along and you'll learn about this tree. I'm just on my way out to Rauhala. I'm here at Halminen, and I saw this fishing boat just off the beach here at Halminen. And you're looking down Halminen towards Prutkanpera or Pirapista. And way off in the distance, that far point is Mainal Point or Poton Kallio in Finnish. Around that is Rauhalan Kallio and Rauhala. And this boat's just off the beach here. Not sure what it's doing. It's a beautiful day here on Malcolm Island. I'm down Kaliva Road. As you can see, there's Kaliva Road. Looking towards Lions Park, aka Prutkanpera or Pirapista, or Fart Point. That's Haddington Island or Kivisari, looking towards the town of Port McNeill and behind. And then over there is Hyde Creek, Cormorant Island, Elephant Mountain, and where I'm currently standing here is Hanhilati or Goose Bay, and this is Hanhipuro or Goose Creek on Kaliva Road, and it's low tide right now, so you're looking down the mud flats, and I'm on my way to Rauhala. So from right where I'm standing here along Kaliva Road is the border of the property once owned by my great-grandmother on my dad's side, Lydia Pupera. And my dad once went to the Kaliva School, which was located just a little ways down the road from where I'm currently standing. Now, prior to my great-grandmother owning this section of property, I pulled up the Crown grant for this area, and it belonged to a woman by the name of Minnie Ilka, and she was Crown granted this property, which was about 40 acres, in 1905. So looking down Kaliva Road, from where I'm standing right here, this is the location of where the Kaliva School once stood. Right here. And looking down behind these trees here is where my great-grandmother Lydia Pupera lived. And at one time, this whole stretch going right down to the mouth of the Kaliva Creek, also known as Illeman and Buro, was the property owned by Minnie Ilka. Now, after the Kaliva School was here, it was later moved into town, and it's now the residence, someone's private residence, and it currently resides near our current elementary school in town, A.J. Elliott. So the Kaliva School still does exist, but not in this location. And sometime in the 50s, there was a logging camp here in this area. Now, from right where I'm standing here on Kaliva Road, I'm looking at the eastern edge or the southeastern edge of what was Minnie Ilka's property, and it right here at Illeman in Puro, or the Kaliva Creek, which is right here in between the trees here, is the border between her property and a woman named Amanda Hankinen. And she owned this side, and Minnie Ilka owned that side. Now, they once had a house. Minnie Ilka had a house up here, and she was the adopted mother to a woman named Fanny, who was later married my granduncle Ike Langfest, and his wife was Fanny and Ike. And over on this side, Amanda Hankinen's property, later they were with Kalle Salo, who left Rauhala and lived here, and this is where Kalle Salo farmed. And in later years, my sister married a man named George Hewson, and they once lived in this area too. So just on the little slope, that hillside there, was once where Illeman, the hermit that lived on Malcolm Island before the Finnish settlement, had a little cabin there. And Matti Halminen first stayed in that cabin when they were getting established here on Malcolm Island. And here I'm looking down at the Kaliva Creek, also known as Illeman in Puro, or Illeman's Creek, named after Illeman the hermit. And you're looking down the beaches of Illeman and Ranta, or Illeman shores. So here on Kaliva Road, up where the current house up there, when I was growing up, that was George Hewson's house, where my sister and George Hewson lived, the late George Hewson. And that was once the root cellar, or Kalle Salo's root cellar. And then the other side of the creek, on Minnie Ilka's side, is where they had the house. And I guess it was Amanda Hankinen, and Minnie Ilka and Kalle Salo and Fanny all living together there when they farmed this area. Now, from where I'm standing here near the Kaliva Creek, or Illeman in Puro, right about there is Lions Park, or Prutkenpera. And if you remember from a previous video visiting Prutkenpera, I told the story that Kalle Salo used to farm here in the area where I'm standing, just above Kaliva Road. And he made enough money, he used to row his produce over to Alert Bay, which is that island over there on the other side of Cormorant Island is Alert Bay. And he used to row his produce over there until he could afford to buy himself a outboard engine. And he was a farmer, not a mechanic, so when he couldn't get the outboard engine to work, he threw it overboard in a frustration, and they named Prutkenpera after that incident, which means the end of that damn machine. Prutku in Finnish is a word for outboard engine, is an onomatopoeia for like a sound, imitating the sound effect. As you can see through here, where the alders are growing, it was once all a field. And my grandmother, Ellen Langfest, who lived on Lydia Pupra's property down the road from here, in the summers used to cut the grass all down by hand with a scythe, and that's what she did to pay for school work the summer months, making hay bales down all the way down from where they lived, down Kaliva Road towards Maynell Point. Out here going forward is where Amanda Hankinen's property ended. So the next property over was mainly going up into the forest behind all these, but it brushed the edge of the ocean line here, and it was owned by a man named John Gill. And who knows who he was. But later, in this general area here, the property directly up from here is where our house in Sointala was first built in and around 1936. And then it was moved into town around 1942. So in this whole stretch going down Cleaver Road, where this guy named John Gills once owned, nobody used to live in this area. It was later subdivided and is now several properties. So right at the border of my uncle's property here, looking down Cleaver Road, this is my uncle's old farm. I'm looking down Cleaver Road, and right here, going towards Mainell Point, or the very beginning of Mainell Point on Cleaver Road, was all the Halminen farm. Now, at one time I didn't know that my uncle's was part of the Halminen farm until I pulled up the Crown grants, which the surveyor helped me pull up some grants, and I learned that my uncle's was at one time on the Halminen farm. And it went as far down as that hillside way off in the distance, which is the beginning of Mainell Road. So I'm looking down Cleaver Road towards town at the very edge of what was Matti Halminen's old farm. And the house used to be up on the hill up here, and it's now a fishing lodge, in modern times called Sointala Lodge. And bordering that was John Poto's property, and this is the very beginning where Cleaver Road ends and the very beginning of Mainell Road begins. And before that, Mainell Road did not exist. There was just a little trail going beyond here that went through the Poto farm to Rauhala. And all that remains of, in the general location anyways, of the Poto farm is Oli Poto's boathouse here, facing the beach. And the house that once was on the hillside here, and it was later moved further back onto the property. And from here, there's actually a famous photo from a book by Sakari Palsi, who stood right here in this area looking out from where I'm standing in the 1920s. And here, 100 years later, in 2025, I'm looking from the exact location where he was standing. And I'm just walking down here. There's a bit of a boat launch from the lodge, and you're looking down to the beginning of the bluffs at Mainell Point, also known at this location as Poton Kallio, after the Poto family that homesteaded just up on Mainell Point here. You're looking back, there's my truck at what once was the Matti Halminen's farm. Okay, so we have 3 photos here that I printed from Sakari Palsi's book, and he visited Sointala back in the 1920s. Now this first one here is on top of Mainell Point, looking down towards Halminen's farm, Matti Halminen's farm from John Poto's farm. And you can see here Cleaver Road did not yet exist. And in behind in this area here is where Kalle Salo had his farm. Now, this next photo, that's Matti Halminen himself. And this is on top of the hill. And this is standing on the beach, looking out towards Cormorant Island and Elephant Mountain 100 years ago. And here at the very end of Mainell Road is the gate which leads to our property, Rauhala. Now Rauhala is the only property that still remains in pretty much one piece. It's now 2 properties, but it was originally crown granted in 1905 to a man named Emil Takala. And it was later subdivided into 2 properties, and I'll talk more about that in the future. But the other properties where John Poto once owned on Maynell Point, here I'm looking down Maynell Road, is now several properties, as is what once was Matty Halminen's property is now 4 properties. Rauhala is still 1. So on the Crown grants, you'll notice there's a drawing of this old swamp or a lake in behind Matty Halminen's property, and the creek drains into the out at Rauhala, and that is the creek at Rauhala and Puro. And in the Hungry 30s, they, as a make work project, they hand dug ditches along that swamp into the creek to drain it to make better farmland between the Poto farm, Halminen farm, and out at Rauhala. And the original name for that swampy area was Illeman's Bog, or Illeman and Suo in Finnish, named after Illeman, the hermit that lived in the area. Now, the swamp was later known as Halminen Swamp, named after Matty Halminen, who homesteaded in this area. And currently, it resides on one of the neighbors' properties out Cleaver Road, and I have permission to go up and take a look. I've never actually been to Halminen Swamp or Illeman's Bog, and we're going to go take a look. So let's go up and see Halminen Swamp, or Illeman and Suo, Illeman's Bog. Now, before I continue, I just want to show you these 3 Crown grants, which are the properties I'm referring to. And this first one here, Emil Takla, he owned Rauhala. And Rauhala, you could see, was one whole property back then. And it says 102 acres. And it's just past the bluff, where the bluffs begin at Maynell Point. And you could see here, there's this lake or a swamp and the creek draining into Rauhala. The next property over on the bluff is John Poto, Crown granted in 1905. And then we have Matty Halminen, who wrote the first history of Sointala, just before you go up the hill at what is now Maynell Road and the end of Cleaver Road here. And this was Halminen's farm. And this is Illeman's Bog. And this was later known as, when Matty Halminen homesteaded the area, it was known as Halminen Swamp. Now this is what the swamp looks like today. Now I'm not wearing cork boots or anything, so it's a little hard to walk through. But you could tell it's got boggy terrain here. So it's definitely a bog. And it's full of Labrador tea, so it smells lovely. Now, this is a herb that grows wild locally called Labrador tea. And if you smell this, it's got almost like a eucalyptus type smell, and it could clear your sinuses. Just gonna try Labrador tea. It's a nice smell. So I'm just walking in around Halminen Swamp here, trying to find evidence of the old ditching project that happened in the Hungry 30s to drain the swamp into the creeks at Rauhala. Looks like there's all these little deer trails going through here. My mom always told the story that when she was a kid, she came up to Halminen Swamp when she was playing hooky one day, skipping school, and she came up here and found this big bullfrog, and she brought it home when she was living at the graveyard property, and she could hear it for years later. She said it's the last bullfrog she's seen on the island. But this island, this swamp here, is right full of Labrador tea and pine. And I'm just wandering around Halminen Swamp, or Illeman's Bog. And it's quite an extensive swampy field. Here we're coming up to like a grassy area. Oh wow. And here the Labrador tea is blooming. And here we are at Illeman's bog. Illeman and Suo, later known as Halminen Swamp. Just a shot of me for posterity here at Illeman's bog, or Illeman and Suo, aka Halminen Swamp. Alright, I found my first evidence of the ditching here. I actually stepped right in a ditch. You could see this was a hand dug ditch going along here. And it went all the way out towards Rauhala. And it looks like Halminen Swamp, or Illeman and Suo, is a vast expanse. It's a rather large swamp with an extensive network of deer trails going off here and there. And I'm assuming it would have looked a lot different back in the past before the ditch digging project happened. And here is another sign of the ditching here. You can't see it too clearly, and it's filled in with a lot of mud now, but this ditch goes off into the forest here. Okay, I found a deer trail leading off to the forest here, and now you can clearly see the ditches. Here's the ditch I followed, and it seems to drain into this main ditch, stretching along the forest edge. So I'm just gonna hop into the forest here a little bit and see where this ditch drains down towards the creek at Rauhala. So I'm just walking in the forest here, following that hand dug ditch, that heritage ditch that goes along Halminen Swamp. And you could see here and there's these little side ditches that drain into this main ditch. I'm gonna see how far down this ditch goes before it veers off down towards Rauhala. And here I'm approaching another ditch coming off of the main ditch from Halminen Swamp. Here it is. You can see it here as it goes off down in the forest. And here I am standing beside one of these ditches coming off of Halminen Swamp that drain towards Rauhala. And I must say, there's quite a few of them here, and must have been quite the make work project, because remember, all these were dug by hand a very long time ago. And it looks like when there's some overflow, they still spill off and drain into these ditches and drain into our creek. Okay, this is still quite a deep and prominent ditch here. I'm just going to step into it. Here is where it comes off of the main ditch. Over there, that bushy area is Halminen Swamp, or Illeman's bog. You can see the main ditch here, and this is one of the drain ditches that goes off towards Rauhala, and you can clearly see the hand dug ditch here going off into the forest. And the further along I go, the deeper the ditches are. So now I'm here at Rauhala, our old heritage farm. And as soon as you pass through the gates at Rauhala, these here are what remains of those hand-dug ditches that drain from the Halminen swamp. So if you remember those side ditches that came off the main ditch at Halminen swamp, go off into the forest, and they eventually drain into this main ditch, and this ditch goes down and eventually drains into the creek at Rauhala. Now it's because of the ditch digging project in the Hungry 30s that the salmon that used to spawn up the creek at Rauhala no longer go up the creek. So in 2016 we had rather heavy rainfall, and the neighbor's property, if you were to follow this ditch going off into the woods over there, one of the neighbor's properties on the edge of Halminen swamp, they have a house in it right at the edge of the swamp, and their whole bottom floor of their house was flooded in with water. And in order to drain into the creek here, he came with his excavator and unfortunately dredged the ditch here into what it currently looks like today. So it's no longer in its original hand dug form. And right here in this area is where the ditch enters and empties into the creek at Rauhala. So just walking down to the creek here. And here we are at the creek at Rauhala. This is the creek at Rauhala, Rauhala. And up there is where the ditch flows into the creek. So I'm not sure when exactly, but at one time Rauhala would have been subdivided by Emil Takla into two properties. Now, one half of Rauhala, a man named Herman Suomela lived here, and he is said to have had a smokehouse at the base of a hollowed out, burnt cedar tree. And this is it here. And inside the hollowed out cedar tree is where he had a smokehouse. And he would catch the fish spawning up the creek here at Rauhala and smoke them in the smokehouse tree. And he would take the smoked fish and sell them in the beer parlors in Alert Bay. So I'm just walking down our road here at Rauhala so you could get a better view of the smokehouse tree. And here's the smokehouse tree. Now, Herman Suomela is said to have died of the Spanish flu pandemic in the 1920s. I'm going to go and take a closer look at the smokehouse tree. I have to be very careful because this whole slab is just dangling there and I don't want it to fall on me. Sometime in the future, this whole thing's going to come down. But you could see in here where he would have built a fire at the base of this hollowed tree, and the smoke would have went up like a giant smokestack. All right, that's about all I have to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this video as I explored the ditch digging project from the Hungry 30s that drains into the creek here at Rauhala from Halminen Swamp or Illeman's Bog. And yeah, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to follow along in my video series. And that's about all I have to say for today. So, ciao.